Well, let me explain. You know how the world sees me as,
Human toilet brush?
bingo. Well, I'm the white sheep of my family. They're involved in a very evil business.
Illegal drugs?
Worse.
Prescription drugs?
Well, not that bad. The Sislaks are...
Yep. So, yeah, that's how bad of a reputation that the pharmaceutical companies have in the modern day. And I mean, you know, you don't need Sislak to tell you about it. Everybody knows somebody that has fallen off because of some kind of a pill addiction. These days, it's just so common. I don't know. And we learned that it was because of the DEA had their hands tied because of some law that was passed, bipartisan, mind you. It was mostly pushed by Republicans, but it had to get bipartisan support to succeed, and it did. And Big Pharma, man, they have deep pockets. They have politicians in both parties, and politicians can be bought quite easily with... You'd be surprised at how small of amount of money that some of these campaign donations are from Big Pharma to these people or their PACs or their super PACs or whatever. You know, super PACs, you can donate unlimited amounts of money and you don't even got to disclose who you are to the public, or the people that you donated to don't have to reveal that you donated it to them. Yet they still admit to donating to people's super PACs by the hundreds of thousands of dollars every campaign. And the 2018 campaign is no different. Big Pharma is heavily invested in candidates. They're heavily invested in candidates that will push their agenda. They're investing in PACs and super PACs alike. And they're putting money up in efforts to, you know, prevent marijuana legalization from getting voted into law. In some places, we haven't really seen those campaigns really get any traction yet. And I live in Michigan, where there is going to be legalizing marijuana will be on the ballot in 2018 in November. And we know of a couple groups that are trying to come out against it, and where they're getting money from, it don't look like they even have money yet. But we'll find out. Big Pharma is definitely gearing up to do whatever they can in this election cycle. Meanwhile, Bernie Sanders. Taking aim at corporate impunity, Sanders' bill would send Big Pharma execs behind the opioid crisis to jail. So this is a legislation that goes a little farther than all these lawsuits that we've been seeing. And we have seen like some of these big executives, like the incest therapeutics executive Kapoor, getting arrested by the FBI last year. That was pretty unexpected. But yeah, this can happen already. If they're already doing stuff that's illegal, that's something outside of what the DEA had their hands tied on. They had their hands tied on whether or not they could go after opioid manufacturers for manufacturing and delivering just ungodly amounts of opioid pills to certain areas. Which they got caught doing several times. So this is from Common Dreams, writer Julia Conley. While President Donald Trump attempts to place blame for enduring opioid addiction crisis on immigrants, Senator Bernie Sanders, independent from Vermont, announced Tuesday that he would introduce legislation to take aim at those drug policy experts agree are truly behind the epidemic that kills tens of thousands of Americans per year, pharmaceutical companies and executives. Quote, at a time when local, state, and federal governments are spending many billions of dollars a year dealing with the impact of the opioid epidemic, we must hold the pharmaceutical companies and executives that created the crisis accountable, said Sanders in a statement. The bill, which I have a copy of, didn't want to do that. But anyway, yeah, I have that, and I will look over that in a second. Will threaten Big Pharma executives with at least 10 years in prison should their companies be found guilty of contributing to the opioid crisis through manipulative marketing tactics. Executives would also face fines equal to their total compensation packages, while companies would be fined $7.8 billion, which is 1/10 of the annual cost of public health epidemic, according to the government estimates. Under the legislation, companies would be required to clearly state that opioids are addictive in any marketing materials for the drugs, which includes popular brands including OxyContin, Vicodin, and Percocet. The roots of the opioid crisis are traced back to the 90s when Purdue Pharma, the maker of OxyContin, began marketing the drug as safe for long-term use of chronic pain, denying that prescription opioids, which are chemically similar to heroin, had highly addictive properties. And they also, I mean, you gotta throw in there too the caveat that they did lobby to get this done, because they tried to do, and this is every time a pill manufacturer like Pharma tries to get something by, the FDA is like this gatekeeper, not to stop them from doing stuff that's dangerous and reckless to public health, but to make sure they get their cut. All right, so at first the FDA came back and said, no, these Oxycontins are too addictive. So they went back to the lab and they made them time release or some shit. They were too easy to abuse because addicts could just crush them up and inject them like heroin. So then they put the time release on it, made it so that people couldn't do that. Maybe, I'm not sure. I don't really know the details of this. I just read it like a couple times a while back. But basically, Purdue had to fight with the FDA to get all these approvals in the 90s. And the FDA today, believe it or not, is even more corrupt than it was back then. In fact, the guy that runs the FDA sat on the board of at least 8 pharmaceutical companies. So that's the guy. We can write all the legislation you want. We need those guys to not be corrupt, especially people trying to legalize marijuana and people trying to keep kratom from being a Schedule 1 drug. Because the enemy is the FDA, and the only reason they are the enemy is because Big Pharma is sicking them on us like dogs. And everybody involved is corrupt, and it's bullshit. So good job, Bernie, for at least lighting up the fire that we're going to try to hold the feet to. So, anyway, after the opioid painkiller prescriptions skyrocketed as a result, the rate of overdose began to rise as well, with opioid overdoses killing at least 63,000 Americans in 2016. We'll call them opioid-related overdoses. In Ohio next year, Purdue is one of several drug companies that will face a jury trial over lawsuit accusing them of deceptively marketing opioids and alleging distributors ignored red flags indicating that painkillers were being diverted for improper uses. But Sanders noted that no company has truly been held liable for the epidemic, which Purdue alone makes tens of billions of dollars off of in recent years. In fact, the Sackler family that is Purdue Pharma, basically, they rose up in the ranks with OxyContin of the Fortune 500. And I think they made it to like I'm not sure, but they're in like the top 40 or top 20 even at $16 billion, or maybe they were 16th with $22 billion, something like that. But yeah, they pled guilty in 2007 and agreed to pay more than $600 million in fines for misleading the public about the risks of the drug. But the company made $22 billion off the drug in the past decade, and that's just a testament to like how these companies that really rake it in, and a lot of times they're almost monopolies. I mean, they're not technically monopolies, but they have carved out such a good niche in the sector that they are, that they pretty much are a monopoly in their own right. And I mean, $600 million to somebody that made $22 billion, it's not really something that they chalk up as even a cost of doing business. I mean, inflation probably hurt them more than that. So we know that pharmaceutical companies lied about the addictive impacts of opioids that they manufactured, said Sanders. They knew how dangerous these products were, but refused to tell doctors and patients. Yet, while some of these companies have made billions each year in profits, not one of them has been held fully accountable for its role in the epidemic that is killing tens of thousands of Americans each year. And I wish there was a way we could go back through the years and look at the lobbying with the companies that lobbied and the laws that were being passed and change all those laws, put all those lobbyists in jail and shut down all these big pharma companies and charge some of these people with manslaughter or something to set some real precedents. So I see this as a good first step. And if this step is blown off and ignored, or any other kind of just cast aside, basically, I mean, it is a bipartisan piece of legislation already. There's people from both parties that are signing on to it. Obviously, Bernie is an independent. And I don't like partisan people commenting on videos. So I see people talking about that partisan bullshit. Just keep it away from my videos, because I don't do it, so I don't expect you to. I try not to. And now let's keep in mind that the topic here that we're talking about is prohibition. And historically speaking, at least in the current last 30 years or more, prohibition has been spearheaded by the Republicans, and it's a liberal principle. You can be libertarian or a liberal Democrat or a liberal leftist in whatever way you want to be, or a liberal rightist, which is usually relegated to libertarians. It's a liberal position, legalizing marijuana, because it's a freedom thing. It's a liberty thing. It's saying that I could put in my body what I want to put in my body because it doesn't harm anybody else. One might argue that alcohol could harm other people when you put it in your body, or nicotine because you blow secondhand smoke in people's faces. But those are legal. So, what I'm talking about here is liberty. And you can't go partisan on Bernie Sanders. All he ever does is try to do things that the people want, instead of like the oligarchy or the government run by corporations, the corporatocracy, whatever you want to call it. So I fall in line with my own political leanings and beliefs. And when it comes down to it seems like Bernie usually is saying the thing that is the most in line with what I'm thinking. And with this here, this is a good first step. It's a foot in the door. But like I said, if this doesn't get followed, or this doesn't happen, then that's just showing you that it's just being ignored, and we're never going to get to the next level, or to the point where I was talking about earlier, where it's time to just shut down this whole big pharma lobbyist revolving door system. The politicians, the lobbyists, and the people that are pharma execs, they're all one and the same. You can pick them out of the crowd and be like, oh, look at this guy. He was a lobbyist, and then he worked for big pharma, and now he's running for Congress. I mean, there's examples of that from coast to coast. It's disgusting. So here is the actual piece. It's called the Opioid Crisis Accountability Act of 2018, and this is the short title. Prohibition of certain marketing and distribution practices with respect to opioids. Bans any form of direct-to-consumer marketing of an opioid with falsely suggests the product has no addictive forming or addiction-sustaining qualities or risks. Companies in violation of this provision will be fined 25% of the profits from their opioid products. That's a little better than that $600 million on billions, right? 25% is actually a dent in anybody's forecast. Prevents companies from supplying a state or community with a quantity of opioids that is not medically responsible. Or reasonable, I should say. That's what it says. And that's just a testament to this story. 21 million opioid painkillers sent to a town with 2,900 people. There's worse examples, and that's a 10-year total. So we're talking about 2 million pills for 3 million people, or 3,000 people. It's a lot of pills. I think. I don't know. It just depends on if you're talking about every single person in that town needs Oxycontin, then that seems like a whole different kind of problem we have. So requires an individual to report to the Health and Human Services Secretary any pattern of orders of opioids that would seem medically unreasonable. Bans individuals who work for a company that manufactures or distributes an opioid product from engaging in certain marketing and distributing practices. Creates criminal liability for top company executives. Penalties include fines equal to the executive's compensation package or a minimum of 10 years. Whoa. Watch out, Kapoor. requires a company found liable for contributing to the opioid epidemic to be fined $7.8 billion in addition to the penalties listed above to offset the total economic impact of the crisis. Establishes an opioid reimbursement fund administered by the Health and Homeland Health and the HHS secretary in consultation with the FDA. All penalties collected under this act will be deposited in the fund. Okay. I just hope that there's some kind of thing going on where, that's just not some kind of thing that gets corruptly spent on other bullshit that we don't want it to. I mean, there's got to be a way that you could use this to help a lot of the problems that the opioid epidemic causes. Gives priority for receipt of such funds to, SM, SAM, HSA, whatever that is, DOL, DOJ, Department of Education, as well as Head Start programs. Not sure what DOL or this other one is, but DOJ, I guess, you want to give money back to them for doing their job. I don't understand why the DOJ needs a cut. Penalizes drug manufacturers. This is the reduced exclusivity. Penalizes drug manufacturers who illegally advertise, market, or distribute an opioid product by stripping them of any remaining period of market exclusivity for such product. Reduces the remaining period of market exclusivity by 1/2 of the time remaining for all other opioid products made by the company. Prohibits any new or additional exclusivity from being awarded to the offending drug manufacturer with the application for an opioid product before the FDA or a product advertised as a result of product hopping. And this is to basically take the restraints off of people from making generic forms of these drugs, because what happens is, that they make it so you can't make certain drugs generic form, and then when you go to the doctor to get your Vicodin or whatever, all of a sudden they're like, oh, there isn't no generics on this one, unfortunately, so you have to pay full price, and it's like outrageous amounts compared to the sometimes as much as 10 times as much. So that's a good thing going on there. And then reimbursement for opioids developed using federal funding. Now, there's another big problem we have with these pill manufacturers and a lot of other things, is like they do all their research and development using government funding, and then they turn around and stick the cost of that to the people by, in their pricing schemes. So this is like, there's so many ways we have to chisel away at drug pricing. It's one of the major problems with pharmaceutical companies, is the way that they're allowed to basically charge you whatever. I mean, everybody remembers the Pharma bro, Martin Shkreli or whatever. So, that and the EpiPen debacle. So this is happening with all drugs, not just things that are really specific. And, this is like diabetes medicine now, and basically anything, man. Blood thinners, it's ridiculous. All right, this requires any drug manufacturer or distributor that violates this act and receive federal funding to develop the opioid reimburse the amount of federal funding received. And then the last piece of this, treatment of certain taxpayer violations, illegal marketing and distribution practices. Prohibits manufacturers who are found to be in violation of this act from receiving certain tax cuts, and requires them to pay an increased amount in taxes that is equal to the amount that they would have received in tax credits. So, just like every other big corporation, these, pill manufacturers, a lot of times they don't even pay taxes. In fact, they get taxes back. And it's like they're making billions of dollars on paper above board, and all of a sudden, they get tax money back. It's hard to believe, but, if you averaged out the top 5 or 10 even pharmaceutical companies, I think the effective tax rate that they pay would probably be around 10. And I'm not even exaggerating. So, and it's amazing because they get out of a lot of it, but yet there's places where people have to pay taxes for medicine. And when it comes to medical marijuana, I don't think there's any exception. There might be like a couple places still, But I don't know. I think pretty much everywhere has this idea that taxing medical marijuana is fine. So that's all I got on this. Just remember what Sizzlack said. Not that bad. Not as bad as being a prescription drug pusher. And thanks again, Bernie, for getting fed up and doing something about it. I wish more politicians were actually proactive at doing shit like this. And when it comes to cannabis, it seems like, we don't got too many people out there doing that.